Hey, so good morning and welcome to another of the Teaching Academy's professional development series. We're in the midst of 2026-60 and this morning's session is around two tools inside Brightspace, the first being Intelligent Agents and the second being the Brightspace Awards feature, which talks to certificate and badge provisioning. We're going to be spending more time looking at intelligent agents than on badges and certificates. And I'll explain kind of why that is as we go through. But I will point out that there's quite a lot of information on this Padlet board for your reference, and you'll find that there's links to a lot of other more comprehensive resources, including videos and walkthroughs and other things. And I've recorded some of those as well, which will take you through some of those processes in more depth if you're looking for that information. So, as I said, we will be spending more time first talking about intelligent agents, and we'll get into that now. It is being recorded, and all of the assets, etc., from the session will be made available to people after the fact. Usual kind of rules apply for the session. If you've got any comments and things, questions, by all means, either put them into the chat or raise your hand, etc., and we'll stop periodically for some comments in that space when and if needed. All right, so let me kick off the slideshow on the Padlet board. We'll spend most of the time inside the tool interface, but this is usually just where I do a bit of context. Usually when I run the intelligent agent session particularly, people are coming in already with some ideas about maybe the information that they're wanting either to get or the process that they want to engage with. And so what I'm going to drop into the chat in the background, and you don't have to put anything into it right now, but maybe over the course of the session, if something occurs to you that you would like to try and set up an agent for, by all means, drop it into the Menti that is here. I've just put the Padlet link in. Well done, Lachlan. Let's go for the actual Menti instead. There we go. All right, so essentially the question is, what are some of the ways that you might be thinking about using intelligent agents in your subject? And we will revisit this further into the session to see where people are going. Now let's talk about exactly what they are, and we'll come back to that, that word cloud to see what people are thinking. So what are intelligent agents? In Brightspace, an intelligent agent is an automated process. You can set it up so that it runs periodically, however often you want it to run, or you can set it to be a one-time thing if you just want to see at a point in time. Firstly, how many users meet particular conditions that you establish, and secondly, the response that the intelligent agent will trigger. Now, in most instances, that's linked to communications. So, for example, when Hector doesn't pass his quiz in week 3, I can turn around and have the system send him an email, send me an email, send someone else an email that could be a template or automatic that says, hi, I've noticed that you unfortunately didn't pass this thing and here's what we're going to do about it, or maybe you need to look at these materials, etc. So we're talking about triggered responses from the system where you can make them essentially as simple, if A then B, or as complex as you like, which might mean that people have to meet multiple conditions before that response happens. But what I want to look at today is a few examples of agents that are being used at CSU, maybe to give you a bit more of an idea about some opportunities for yourself. But I'd also like you to think about not just the communication aspect, but the fact that agents and where the agents sit, so the agent dashboard, actually presents a great way to get immediate information about your cohort, using it as a learning analytics type tool at a glance. So it basically means without having to run reports or go into other systems, you can literally go to a screen and see how many students have hit this particular milestone or haven't hit this particular milestone, or it doesn't always have to be about sending a communication. It could simply be that you want a quick way of seeing who's hitting particular milestones within your subject. So let's have a look at some examples first of what agents look like. So where am I going to start? Let's go into, we might start with the Foundation of Learning and Teaching program that the Teaching Academy runs. A number of you would have been through that, I'm thinking. But we use agents quite a lot in the Teaching Academy, and we find our intelligent agents available to teaching staff inside the communication menu down towards the bottom, intelligent agents. So as long as you have a staff role, you'll be able to see that option there. If you can't find it there for whatever reason, or your preference is to find everything through subject admin, you can also go into the subject admin area and you'll find intelligent agents in here as well underneath the communication menu. They both go to exactly the same spot. So when we open that up, this is what I'm referring to when I say the agent dashboard. Each one of these represents a particular automation that has been set up, and we will walk through that process of how to set them up. But this is what I mean when I talk about a dashboard. When I'm saying at a glance, how many are impacted by this particular thing when it runs. And some of these run every day. Some of them will run once. Some of them run multiple times a session. But you'll be able to see when the agent scan of the subject has last run and how many users were identified as part of that. And then if you want to actually get the details around who that was, you can click on the link there and it will pull up the names, for example, and if there was an action taken. And as I said, that usually refers to a communication of some description. So that's one agent, and that was looking at a particular run of that agent that happened in April or whenever that was. You can get a full report of all of the times that it has run if you want to get that information as well. So those we're talking about in this instance, students that have not accessed particular content. That's the condition, the if. If a student hasn't done X, Y, and Z, hasn't looked at particular content, I want to send them an email at a certain point. That's the condition for the content access reminder. Some others that we've set up include the moment that a student has been enrolled into a particular program or subject, we were then able to set up a period of time that has lapsed, and then we send them a communication. So you've been enrolled for a month, 30 days, now I want to send every student an email at that particular point in time. So you can send that kind of triggered, scheduled communication using an intelligent agent if you want to. This one is an assignment submission reminder. So the if is if a student hasn't submitted an assignment by a particular point in time, send them this communication, so a follow-up. So that's submission into an assignment portal. What else have we got here? Completion. In this case, we've established that to finish this program, student needs to have completed the submission of multiple items. So there might be an essay, a quiz, and a report or something. And when they've met all of those conditions, the system automatically is checking every day, running to see who's met those conditions. And when they do, we send them a communication. But in this case, you'll notice that I've put here no message. There's no comms attached to it. I just want to know how many people have actually met it. How many ever have, in this particular subject, have met that requirement. So I'm using the dashboard for analytics, so to speak, surface level analytics, just as much as I am for sending out communications in response. Just something to think about. The peer review stuff, for those of you involved in the peer review process, essentially when you get matched up with a mentor in the program, we allocate a student to a particular mentor. We want both of those people to get a communication, anyone that's been added to that mentor. So in fact, this type of intelligent agent is about being enrolled into a group. So any student that gets enrolled into a particular group will get this communication. So it's actually a bulk communication to a bunch of students as a result of being enrolled into a group. So that's some examples of how intelligent agents are being used in the fault program. I'd encourage any of you that have been using any or thinking about some in yours you can drop them into the chat, etc. I will check the Menti board to see if anyone's put anything in there just yet. Maybe not. Aha, generating reports. Okay, right. Well, someone's thinking along the same lines as me. Let's go back to looking at the agents again. All right, so what I want to start doing at this point is working through the process of setting up your own agent. And again, if you've got questions around any of that process as I work through it, drop them into the chat, come off mute, etc. I'm not precious about that at all. So we might start with making a new agent. And I'll just point out that the other option here, categories, and you may have experienced in Brightspace up to this point, the word categories occurs just about everywhere, and it almost always means something different depending on where in the system you are. In the assignment area, for example, if you have categories, it basically means a subheading for you to organize your assignments under, and that's it. In the gradebook, for example, a category refers to an umbrella to organize your columns underneath a particular kind of heading or cluster. In the agent list, it's the same idea where all it's doing is helping me organize which of my agents sit under a particular heading. So don't kind of overthink it. But that term can be a little bit confusing sometimes because in areas like the discussion board or the groups tool, categories mean something different again. Can be quite annoying when they use that same term. So let's make a new agent. All right, so we're going to give it a name. So let's go for sample agent 1. We might zoom in a little, so hopefully this is big enough for people to see. Is that viewable okay for everybody? Okay, great. All right, don't worry about the description so much. That's, unless you don't know what it is, I would suggest you provide enough detail in the title of the thing so that you know what it is. You don't want to be reading a description every time. If you haven't put in a category and you want to use one, you can create one here, or you can organize it under a pre-existing category if you want. But again, it's just a subheading. It's not going to stop it being visible to you. And then you'll notice that the unticked box here around status says that by default the agent is not running, and until such time as you go in here and tick this box, it's not on. So don't worry going through this process that you've set it up and oh wait, actually I don't want it to be working just yet. Until you're ready to go back and start doing this thing, leave this unchecked. But when you're finished with the setup and you're happy with it, tick the box. Similarly, if you want to park it and only use it at one particular point in time, then you can uncheck this if you like until you're ready to do so. All right, so we have 3 configuration areas to work through: scheduling, criteria, and actions. Let's start under our scheduling. A lot of this is pretty self-explanatory. One big kind of credit I give to Brightspace is that it's fairly intuitive in terms of the language and the way it organizes this stuff. And it's asking us at the moment, how often do we want this thing to run, the frequency? And at the moment, it's not. So until such time as I manually say, run it now, it's not actually going to run by itself. It's going to wait for me to actually trigger it. So that's one way of using an agent, is that you decide exactly at one particular point in time, I want to run it now. However, if you want to set it free in the wild, you're going to need to establish a schedule for it. So we look at our options here under schedule, and you'll see that we can do a one-off where they're going to ask you for the date and the time when to do the thing, scheduling it in advance. Or for example, I want it to run every hour. I think that's probably a little overkill, but who knows, you might find a use for that. Every day, if you're wanting that information to be checked. Every week, every month, once a year, for example. Now, considering that the way that we operate within our subjects most of the time is within a session, I probably see most of these being set up to run weekly. And that usually lines up with academics thinking about, I want to check something once a week just to keep tabs on a particular bit of information or comms or whatever. So from my experience, weekly is probably the most common one that's set. So I'm going to set mine at weekly, and then it asks how many. I'll say, well, every 1 week, please, but it could be more. And I want it to run on a Monday, and I'm going to go, right, Monday morning, 9 a.m. So all of this pretty straightforward. Set the schedule for when you want the agent to run by itself, and when do I want that to kick off. If you don't set this running, it won't start running. Again, if the agent box is not ticked and you haven't established when it's going to start, it just won't know to begin that process. So let's say I want this to start running from next Monday, and then that's my scheduling taken care of. So we can collapse that and start looking at the criteria section. And I would argue that this is probably the most interesting part of the equation. First thing it asks us is, who is the agent going to be searching for when it's identifying users? Everybody in the class list, including all the teaching staff. So if you want your colleagues and others to also be getting reminders or emails about things, then tick that box. But otherwise, most of the time people are setting this up, they want students. So let's go users with specific roles, find student in the list, and we can and we're done at that point. But you may have use cases for other roles that you want sort of picked out from this, but most of the time this is going to be referring to students. It gives us a couple of initial options for people that are picked up in the scan. If you want to look at their login activity into Brightspace, that's pretty broad. Or their subject activity, so not just logging into Brightspace, but they've gone into a subject and started moving between folders and pages and other things. It gives you those two initial options, but I don't see those being used a whole lot in terms of this scan. The real value for me in the search is under our release conditions, because we can get into a lot more detail here. So what I'm going to do here is browse in my release conditions and start seeing, oh, these are existing ones. Hang on, let's get out of that. We'll make a new one. Create. All right, so what are our options here? I, for example, might want to look at students submitting assignments. And at that point, it could be students that have submitted are going to be picked up. Students that have received feedback, which means that an assignment has been marked and published. For example, they would have got the feedback. Maybe that a student got a particular score on a rubric. That's interesting. Students that haven't submitted will be picked up in the scan. We haven't got into our action yet, like what are we going to do about it? We're just identifying them. And this one about associated outcome. We don't use the Brightspace outcomes tool. It's not turned on and it's not utilized by anybody. So you can ignore that last one. But those are our options with assignments. I'm going to go for probably a basic one. I'll come back to it, but let's look at the other options we've got. Awards, which we'll talk about in the second part of today's session. If they've received a particular award, like a badge, for example, then we can look at what's the action. Will we want to see them identified on the dashboard? Do we want to send them an email or a communication? You can link it to them getting that award. If you've set up checklists in Brightspace, you can then trigger the agent to pick up users that have either finished it, finished a particular part of the checklist, identified it, even down to the point of they haven't ticked a particular item in the checklist. So if you put something to a group of students and said, to have done this properly, you need to have done these 5 things and tick these boxes. And for students that have only ticked 4 of them and haven't ticked a particular one, we can trigger that action. See them in the dashboard, send a communication if we need to. So that's got some interesting potential, I think. We can link it to the class list, so we can see if a student, for example, has been enrolled into a particular group. We trigger this response. And that's what I was showing you earlier with the peer review enrollees in Fault. When you've been added into a group, any student in that group will then be sent that communication as a result. So it's a triggered automatic action. It can apply to things like org units or being in a particular cohort, but most often I see that being used connected to groups. Right, and then the last one here, this is interesting under class list, date of enrolment in the current org unit. So in layman's terms, org unit just means this subject, right? So the date of enrolment that you were added to the subject And then you'll notice if we choose that option, we can then set a delay. So you might get added to the subject as a student in week -4, and I might say, let's go another 6 weeks into the future or 4 weeks or whatever and say, right, 30 days later, I want you to be sent this particular email, for example, this particular communication. So you can set a delay following their enrollment into the subject, as an example. I don't hate that option. It's quite, I don't know about tricky, but gives us some options. And then I won't go through all of the options in here, but I encourage you to have a look through the list. I know a lot of you already use release conditions for other reasons. It's really good with intelligent agents because of just how much versatility it gives you. Some of the options include completing particular content items, visiting parts of the subject, looking in folders, looking at particular pages, submitting particular tasks or not submitting them, making posts in the discussion board or not making them. There's lots of options in here. Then we get into things like grades. Did you receive a particular grade for a particular task? If so, I'm picking you up on the dashboard, I can see you there, and I can trigger a communication to that. So that's probably one of the most common uses of an intelligent agent, is I want to identify all the students who achieved a particular result for a particular task, and as a result we send, maybe you send a communication, maybe you just want to see them identified quickly and clearly in a list. You can certainly do that with this tool. I'll leave the rest of the options for you to have a look through, but I think you'll agree there's lots to choose from. And the other part is with release conditions, which you may or may not be aware, you don't only have to have one. You can have multiple. So I could turn around and say, well, I want to pick up students that got a particular grade on a particular assignment, and saying, well, if a student happened to get less than 1 in this case, or less than 100% because it's a pass-fail task, I want to pick them up in this agent. That's one condition. And I can now add more and say also, stop looking at existing, Lachlan, create new. And we'll say, oh, and also the student hasn't looked at a particular piece of content. Where's the content? Content. Right, so they haven't visited a particular topic or folder. So let's say more, they haven't looked at that topic, okay. Oh, it's got to be a valid topic. Good one. Let's go for an actual page underneath that. There we go. That's better. So now I have two conditions that are established, and you'll notice that above it's saying that all conditions must be met for them to be identified. So they have to have met both of these. You can do an either or scenario here. I can say it could be any condition, which is one or the other. I want them identified, or it can be I want them to have met all of those conditions before they're picked up in the agent. Right, so we've just established an agent, I might say any condition, and we've now finished looking at our criteria for who's going to be picked up, which leaves the last part, which is the actions. And as I mentioned to you earlier, this is usually results in this one, sending a communication. And you can carve that out, and I'll talk about that in a second. But firstly, let's look at repetition. Do you only want to run this to pick up people as a once-off and never again? So if you're running this agent every day, but I only want the student to be picked up and potentially emailed once if they meet the criterion, then you need to leave it on this default that says take action only the first time the agent's criteria is satisfied. Or if you want it to happen every time the agent runs and identifies a user. That could be potentially problematic if a student is being sent a reminder every day of the course, for example, because they haven't done something. So think carefully about how often you want this to run and how many times you want them to be notified. So the action in this instance is the sending of the email. That's the only action that applies here. Okay, so leave it on the default unless you've got a really good reason not to. There are two types of actions that an intelligent agent can take. The most common one, as I said, is that we're going to send them an email and we can create a template and do some fancy things with a template. But it does have another option here. I'm going to put big kind of warning lights up here saying, before you start playing around with anything that talks about user enrollment, think very carefully about this. Because what it can do is it can change the actual role of the student or the staff member from what they are currently, like enrolled student, to something else, like not enrolled student or another role. So be very, very careful about ticking this box and using it. I will say that one example where we use this is that when someone has finished a particular course, like the Critical AI Literacies course that maybe some of you have done, when you work through that and you've met all the conditions and you get given your certificate at the end, we have an agent that will convert you from being a student in the course to being a staff member, which says, you've finished, you can still access the content, but we're no longer scanning you to see if you're meeting those requirements. So that's quite a particular sort of use case for when we would actually look at changing the role of the user. But most of the time, this is not being used, and I urge caution when playing around with anything to do with user enrollments. Right, let's get into the main event, sending an email. This is going to come from the subject side. It's going to come from Charles Sturt University Brightspace. They can't respond to it or reply. So it's a monodirectional email, so to speak. It's not coming from you, the academic, etc., to the students. It's coming from the subject side or the system. All right. It's going to let us do a few things. I might just move my Padlet board over here so that I know what I'm talking about while I speak to you, because there's a few specifics in here that I want to pick up. So you go over there, back to our agent. Okay, so frequency, repetition, we did that. Creating the criteria, agent, emails. Right, okay, here we go. The reason I need to talk about this is that Brightspace has a feature called special addresses. And special addresses means we can put in a term in here that will capture everybody that meets that kind of that requirement. So I'm going to give you an example, and we use our squiggly brackets for this one, which look like this. And one of our special email addresses, and all of this detail is in the Padlet board, by the way, is initiating user. And what that means is the student who meets this criteria, it's going to put their email address in here. So this is how Brightspace knows who to send this email to. So you can put individual emails in here if you like. I can turn around and go, oh, actually send it to this guy as well. If you want to target them every single time, CC, BCC, whatever you want to do. But initiating user means I want to send as an action for identifying which users meet this requirement. We've already set up our criteria, but who are we going to send this comms to? I want to send it to the student who meets those requirements. So we use this special address, initiating user. I'll put that into the chat for anyone that's curious. Good point. For those of you in the chat that don't have the change role action, this might have to do with me having some superpowers in that particular subject site, maybe. If you don't have it, wonderful. Ignore that. All right. So you can use special email addresses. Most of the time, initiating user is the one that we're looking for. There are some others in there, but you'll find if you click on these links that are inside the action area, it'll give you a full listing of the potential other special email addresses if you're looking for them. But in my experience with this tool so far, most of the time people are using this one, which is going to send it to the student and probably themselves as well if they want to be notified or not. So there it is. What special email addresses can I use? Open that up, it'll give you a full listing of them. Right, then we need a subject that's going to appear for them, which might be access, reminder, something, whatever the case might be. That's going to go at the top of the email that you send to the student. And then we get down to our template where you create the message that you want to send to the students. Inside this area, Brightspace has some other nifty features called replace strings, which are the same principle as this special email address. So if I don't want to have to figure out what the student's name is every time in here, and I don't want it to sound generic, dear student, that sounds lovely. I'd rather identify the student by name. I can use a replace string like squiggly brackets. So we might say dear. Then we get into, right, initiating user. Notice the capital at the beginning of each of these. First name. At that point, when it sends the email and it knows that it's sending it to Jody, for example, it'll say, Dear Jody, and it'll look like Lachlan has actually sent this in person and identified her in this case. Gimmicky, but small things, and it doesn't cost you anything to do it. So initiating user first name, put in your template, and then this will go in the email to the student. You'll notice underneath, you can add attachments to it if you need to. If you want to turn on the recorder and have a recorded message or a webcam message or whatever of your own face on it, you can do those things as well. But it also has the full Brightspace editor here, including the insert stuff and quick link options, which means that if you wanted to point the student to a particular part of the course or the subject, you could turn around and say somewhere in the message, maybe you needed to look at this particular piece of content. And I might say that, and you should have gone to this particular page, and whatever. And you'll see that it drops the quick link directly into the email so that the student could then be taken directly to that relevant piece of information, task, whatever the case may be. So you can use the insert stuff option, which allows you to add attachments and link to other parts of the subject, or you can use quick linking as well. These options are available in your content areas and your assignments, etc. in Brightspace, and I'm assuming that a lot of you have already come across them before. But insert stuff and quick linking, I think probably add a little bit more potency to an email that wants a student to be doing a particular thing inside a subject site. You're not just talking about it, you're also linking directly to the thing. All right, so let's assume that you've put your templated email in place. Maybe you've got attachments for it, maybe you don't.
Sorry, Lucky, just wanted to jump in super quick there. I just chucked in the chat the instructions which had those links, but just if you scroll up a little bit, there's the quick link there that reminds you all the different replacement strings that you can use straight above that field. What replacement strings can I use? I found that really just helpful because there's a long list to remember. Yeah, so it's just there and quick and easy. And there's some good ones in there like last login date and stuff like that. So you can actually specifically say you haven't logged in since, and then it will put the last login date in. I like that one.
Yes, we've got all your information, all your data, and we know that the last time you looked at this was X. Good point. Thank you, Murray. So there is a list there. I think the list is even longer. There's a list on the Brightspace community page, which actually has some more obscure ones in it as well. But this is a pretty decent place to start if you're looking to personalize the communication that you're sending to the student. All of them start with that lovely squiggly bracket, etc. Start and finish with it. And if there are multiple kind of terms, there'll always be a capital at the beginning of the different parts of the term. All right, last part, email format, HTML and plain text. I'd probably leave HTML on by default. It means that if people are opening this on their phones and other different email applications, we don't really know what application the student's going to use to read the thing. If you leave it as HTML, it's got the best chance of retaining the formatting or any kind of media and other things that you've embedded in the message if you've added other stuff to it beyond text. If you have it as plain text, that's not going to play for them in their emails. So probably just leave it as HTML by default would be my advice. All right, so we've finished making our agent. We hit save and close. And it'll now sit in your list. It's there at the top for me because I haven't put it within a category currently. And you'll notice that we have a drop down next to it which gives us a few options. I can open it and edit those settings at any time. I can duplicate it if I want to make it again and tweak it if there's a slight difference that you might have for a similar agent. You can look at the complete history every time it's run, which users are picked up, get an Excel printout of them, for example. You can export that history. You can do a practice run or a dummy run, which means I'm not actually going to send the communication to the students, but I just want to see that this is going to work and how many people it picks up. You can run it now if you want to do it and you've figured out that I want to do it at this one point in time rather than following a particular schedule. Let's just run it now. You can do that. Or you can delete it. Remembering that our default when we created it up the top is that the agent is not enabled. So it's not running automatically currently despite setting a schedule. When we turn that on, it'll start looking at scheduling and whether it can run. All right, let's do a dummy run and see if this actually picks anything up. Yep, definitely want to do it. That's why I clicked it. All right, so now it is doing that dummy run, and once this is actually finished, you'll get a notification email that it has run. It's pretty quick. This will usually happen inside a minute or so, but you'll note there's a message there talking about server priorities and other garbage, but it'll run pretty quick. And you'll see that it's run, and it's already telling me in our practice run, so it didn't send that communication to 216 staff, students inside the fault site, I hope, but it is a practice run, so it didn't do the action. Doesn't do the action, just tells me how many it picked up, and I can go in there and see who all those users are. So let's stop there for a moment and see if we've got anyone wanting to ask any questions or comment or weigh in on this process so far. I'm hoping that people are thinking maybe around some possibilities around how they might want to set up one or more agents in their sites. Maybe so they have a dashboard to see numbers on how many students are meeting particular thresholds or not, or being picked up, or maybe along those communication angles. Eleanor.
Hey Lachlan, I was thinking about how great it would be to be able to email students who hadn't submitted assignments, and my one concern is I put all of the extensions in the system, so making sure that students with extensions aren't emailed with a reminder, but then they might all have different dates. So yeah, is there a way around, or is there a way to incorporate their extension dates, like their Dropbox extension dates, into that process?
Wow, that's a really good point. Well, let's go for a bit of a hunt and see what we can find. My first kind of thought, a little bit outside the box, is, and I can see Murray putting his camera on there, so maybe he's got something to say about it. But the first thought I had was, if I enrolled all of those with extensions into a group, for example, just so I had put them in, I could set that as a release condition as one of the things. So anyone that had been added to that group doesn't get it, for example, or, you know, so
yeah, okay,
that's a possibility. Yeah. What do you got, Muzz?
Yeah, I was going to jump in. Unfortunately, there's nothing without an extra step like that. My general advice that I give personally to people is to write make sure when you write these emails that you're noting that these are generic. So even if I was doing one for, say, inactivity for 7 days, I would write, please note, this is an automated email that is flagged that you've been at. If this is incorrect, please reach out to your subject coordinator. So you could say something like, this is flagged that your assessment has not been submitted. If you put in for an application, please do not worry, that process is taking place. You should have received a confirmation email saying that you have been granted that extension. Now you can ignore this email. So just kind of making sure that students are well aware that these are automated, generic systems that are being used. And I would say that across the board for any communications through intelligent agents, please write that this is, an automated email. If you have any questions or this doesn't seem right, please reach out to your subject coordinator. Because we do have, they can occasionally do little funny things like that, or student freaks out because they've got a 7-day, automatic extension already. They've got that confirmation email and they get an email from an intelligent agent. So I think it's just good practice.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you both. That's very helpful.
I'd like it to be able to pick those things up easily, but then again, I think every single person in the room wants extensions and special access to be, let's say, working in a more integrated way than it is currently. But and that includes to intelligent agents. Joe Fitzgibbon, how can we help?
Hi, I am thinking I might like to use this in about week 3 of the session to pick up. I go into Brightspace and I look at class progress, and I sort of send an email out to students where it looks like they haven't been engaging with their first module, the first lot of topics. But then I always, whilst I do this, this may not be correct, please reach out. I do something like that. But I always get some cranky emails back from students. I download everything. That's how I'm engaging. Thoughts on how this intelligent agent is going to be intelligent around that?
To be intelligent. Well, I guess it comes down to that angle around whether or not you're targeting particular individuals that haven't versus maybe a blanket approach, which then serves as some kind of overall finger on the pulse type approach around it. And I'm going to give you an example there before I throw over to Hector. The content access reminder that's done in Fault goes to everybody, for example. If I find where there's one in here around weeks. Right, so you can see that they've set up particular agents to run at particular points in time as reminders for everybody. So if I look at, there was one. Let's look at one of these reminders anyway. This one is that a particular task is due after a certain period of time has run, and this goes to everybody. So in a content sense, you might turn around and say, I want this to run after X days from their enrollment. So we've figured out how many weeks. And then the message that gets sent is to everybody, even though it's picking up again in the actions, you'll see that they've got initiating first user. And this is a reminder that goes to everybody that says, by this point, you should have done X, Y, Z. It's going to everybody rather than narrowing it down saying, Eleanor, we noticed that you haven't actually submitted this thing at this point in time or been looking at this particular piece of content. So I guess it's two sides of the same coin. One is a blanket approach that says we're not targeting anyone individually. We just want to have these reminders in place to kind of maybe draw your attention back to where you should be at this point in time. And I quite like that as an approach because it allows you also to spend some time thinking about those milestones or particular progression points that you might say if someone's struggling to figure out for themselves where they should be up to by now, or what they should be across, this gives you a chance to articulate that and it gets delivered to them personally. Not just in the subject site, not relying on them going to a particular part of the site to look at and see that information. It's getting sent to their device, going through to their emails. You're getting that information that says, here's our point in time kind of reminder of where you should be at. I don't hate that as a strategy that again doesn't kind of single people out. Hector.
Just following up on that, I agree with that a broad approach. We notice that when we target specific users based on activity, it's not very reliable. One of the reasons, and we have followed this up with the IT as well, is that a lot of the students, at least in our cohorts, they use the Pulse app. And the Pulse app, a lot of the students actually learn everything through the Pulse app. And the system doesn't really pick up on engagement. I think there's a very specific time that the student needs to be online in the Pulse app to trigger activity in the Pulse app and then feed into the system. So some students also will be sending emails saying like, well, I'm using the Pulse app and it's not really picking up on their activity. So we noticed that as well. I'm not sure if that has been fixed. The other one I had a comment or a question on the chat was about if we can now use triggers for the attendance registers, and that'll be a really good one. Last time we checked, we couldn't, but I'm wondering if that's something that we could maybe do now or eventually we'll be able to do to put a trigger based on attendance.
Right. Well, I'm gonna park that one probably with myself and Murray and others to follow up with to see where it's at, because off the top of my head, I don't think we have an answer to it. I'm not sure if there have been updates on that particular tool, the attendance tool inside Brightspace. It's not widely used, for example, like it's quite niche. And I don't know whether there have been kind of changes to either the roadmap or the vendor actual release that's in the wild. I haven't heard of it being changed, so we'll take that away and get back to you if we can. But no, that is a good point. All right, look, as always, with me, time is running away from me, so I want to actually spend a few minutes looking at the Brightspace Awards function. And again, I'll draw your attention to the Padlet board itself, where I've got information collected on awards in the second half of the board. So a little bit of context, I'll show you some examples, and then we'll see how we're going time-wise. Noting also that last week I did promise to some people to show them the Brightspace glossary tool as a complete aside, and if anyone's curious at looking at that, I'm happy to show you that at the end of this as well. All right, so let's talk about Brightspace Awards. So we'll go back to the base site, and we find awards underneath Subject Admin. For all of you that have access to the admin area, you'll find awards in here sitting underneath assessment. So let's start by giving a little bit of information about what awards are in this case. It's a student engagement mechanism that is at the subject level. There are two types that are available. We have badges, we have certificates. This tool is turned on. And basically there's quite a lot of information around online, etc. Some of it is linked to in the Padlet board for you to look through. There are some guides in there and other information around it. But essentially, a badge is an image, specifically a 200 by 200 pixel PNG file. And when a student receives it, and they've met particular release conditions, again, we look at release conditions, they get sent a notification and this image file, for example, with some text, right? Congratulations, you've achieved this particular badge. And in the case of the Teaching Academy site, these are students that have met the requirements to complete the Foundations of Learning and Teaching program. So they get sent a notification in Brightspace and an email that says, congratulations, you've got this. And inside this subject, next to their name, and when they look at their own profile, they'll see that image. It's just an image. It doesn't work anywhere else outside of Brightspace. So this is not a fully fledged digital badge that you might have heard people talk about elsewhere. I've got my badge that I put onto my CV or my resume and it's linked to LinkedIn and does it. This is not that. The Brightspace badging solution, the way that we have it in place at the moment, is simply applicable in your subject site for the student, and it is an image. That's what they get, along with, obviously the requirements that needed to be met. Just to give you a little bit more example of how this has been used in a few places, if we have a look at this subject, for example, we've got an anatomy subject, and if we go and have a look at the awards area, what you can see here is that we have activities like a knowledge check activity. It's probably a quiz. When they've met those requirements, that release condition, the student gets sent an email and this little icon appears next to their name. So they've met that requirement. So there are others in there, for example, that they've probably, I'm guessing that they've completed particular topics and maybe the topics have a quiz at the end of them. And so that's the release condition that they get to receive these badges. So again, it is an engagement tool. It acknowledges that you've actually accomplished something, you've progressed somewhere, that you've completed something. It has a motivational kind of tie-in, but it is only, and I use this term loosely, of value at the subject level in this particular site. Doesn't go anywhere else. The alternative award type in Brightspace is a certificate, which essentially says if you've met these conditions, you also get a printable PDF certificate that gets emailed to them that they can then print out. That's the difference. They both do exactly the same thing. It's looking for completion of particular activities. You use release conditions to define those. And when you create one, it'll ask you to actually specify what those conditions are and what text you want displayed next to either the badge or the certificate. Now, what I have to say at this point is that before you kind of go off and make a whole lot of them, you should be aware that there is a framework that's in development at the moment in conjunction with branding at the university and other parts around how badges and certificates should be put together. And I'll say that, I suppose, as clearly as I can, which says look out for that framework being released and made available to you to provide some guidelines around how we want badges and certificates to be used. But I'm also going to add in the fact that this is turned on and visible and available to you inside your subject admin areas, and there's information available all over the net and on channels, etc., around how to work with it. So if you're interested in having a play with it, etc., it is there. The most common use cases that we have for them are in org sites rather than subject sites, particularly certificates. And I can give you an example of that. When staff finish the Foundations of Learning and Teaching course, we have a certificate in place. This is the certificate. It's a PDF form, and it will automatically populate the name of the student that has met the conditions that we established, and it will also populate automatically the date. Those two things the system will automatically provide. The rest of this is just a template that we put together in Word, and we feed it to Brightspace. So there's more information on the specifics. Hector, go ahead.
Yeah, this is really interesting. What do you think of these certificates in StudyLink? Do you think this is something that could be used effectively for something like non-award, micro sessions?
I think it's an excellent idea. I don't have an issue with it. The key thing there being that you specified that it's non-award bearing. So to me, that sounds like an excellent idea. And again, I'm going to get tapped on the shoulder where they'll say, make sure that there is some sort of consultation with branding around whether or not if it's got logos and other things in it, then by and large, the web office or branding, etc., wants to probably get a look at things. But I don't see that necessarily as a problem. There's a bit of communication to go backwards and forwards. We're thinking of using this. Can we get your feedback on it, etc.? And done, and then use it. I think it's an excellent idea. This is usually the thing that people want when they've met certain conditions for particular courses. They want the thing they can print out or that they can attach so that they've got evidence that it's happened. Very easy to use. But again, I'll refer to the fact that there is a framework that's in development around preferred usage of badges and certificates. All right, I'm going to move aside from that, but again, I'll point you back towards the Padlet board where there is more detail in place around these. Murray, did you want to weigh in on badges and certs at all?
So I just wanted to, I thought I'd an opportunity to jump in. So just for some background on what Lachlan's saying there is originally apparently the project team decided that this was something that we weren't going to be using here at CSU, but then it was made available, and it got flagged that people were starting to use this tool, which is not necessarily a problem, but then there were some inconsistencies. So that's really been flagged as concerning. So that's been now brought to myself and Tom. We are educational technologists with DLT, and we've started to have this conversation around there's a lot of generic ones up there, for example, in the system that are not CSU branded. They're just generic Brightspace ones. So we're starting to have all these conversations, like I said, trying to put together maybe some guidance. It'll probably go into the Brightspace help page with an updated page on, appropriate use. I think things like the badges, like Lachlan was saying, stays within the subject. So that one's going to be a little bit more open, but as PDF downloadable certificate that has our logo on it, that students could say present to an employer, there does need to be, appropriate consultation with the right department. So that process has literally just kind of happened within, let's say, the last month to get rocking and rolling. So that's why, sorry, Lockie's getting into all of this, but we just had to flag that, we're trying to just clarify a lot of this stuff so we can give you straight answers. And at the moment, we don't have straight answers, unfortunately. So I do apologize for that, but that will be coming.
All right, so let me point out that we've got a couple of minutes to go, and I promised some people that I would show you the glossary tool. So I'm going to deviate here from agents and awards and what have you for a moment. I'm happy to hang around and chat about any of this stuff after we finish today, but let me show you the glossary tool. So you may or may not be aware, may have seen it inside the subject admin area. If you've got a staff role, you will have access under your site resource area to the glossary tool. And the glossary tool, pretty straightforward. It allows you to create one or more terms, and you can in fact import a spreadsheet with all of your terms and definitions and what have you pre-made if you wanted to do that in Excel and import them, and they will then be sitting inside the subject site that you can then make available to the students. So let's add a term in here. So I don't know, what are we going to put in here? I have no idea. Essay. Going to start with an E, and maybe there will be a description in here that says an assignment type thing. Can be as complicated as you like. In here, again, it's got linking to insert stuff, quick linking, other types of media embedding you can put in here, images, etc. You can put all of those in there, and you'll notice that you can also link it directly to any of the content areas or topic areas inside your subject site if you want the student to be able to be taken to where there's more information. So that's also a part of it. When we click on save, your glossary now has an entry under E. Really straightforward, really easy to see. And in fact, if I was to take that link and add it to my content somewhere. Let's say, where am I going to put a page? This will do. Hopefully Kelly's not watching, so she doesn't want to kill me for adding pages. But anyway, let's do it anyway. Page. And I'll go glossary link. Highlight, link, paste the link, and apply. Once we save and close this, we now have a link to that glossary page inside the content for the students. They click on it and Bob's your uncle, it takes you directly to that point. Now, if you wanted it to start at, this is going to take you to the base page, but at the moment I only have one entry under E, and you'll see that they can jump to any point within the glossary tool. And as I mentioned, you are able to import them if you want to prepare them in a CSV document. It even gives you the template here that you can populate yourself if you like. And it looks like this. What's the term? What's the definition? So you're going to get text only if you import it, and then you can add more things to it if you wanted to add other media to it. But having a subject level glossary seems like a pretty decent thing to be adding, particularly depending on the content of the subject. Very, very simple to use and add to, and then the students can view that, access that. They cannot edit it. It's only editable by the teaching team. So that's the glossary tool, and I did manage to fit it in even with 1 minute to go. I wonder if anyone added anything else to our Menti earlier. We did. Checking on progress for modules, for example. Using the replacement strings, okay, good one. Generating reports, automatic reminders. A reminder to book interactive orals if they haven't done it by a particular point. Students haven't engaged yet, for example. Celebrating progress. Absolutely. All wonderful ideas, and I'm glad that this has kind of got you thinking about ways that you might be able to use agents within your subject delivery. So look, we're at exactly time. So I'm going to stop the recording in just a moment. But as I said, I'm happy to hang around and have a chat to anyone that wants to talk about this or anything else. Other than that, I'll say a big thank you to coming out for another of the Teaching Academy PD series. Thanks, folks, and have a great rest of the week. So let's stop recording, and I can